My name is Lynn Questel. I'm the Executive Director of the Tennessee Emergency Communications Board, and I've had the great privilege of being asked here to talk about our Next Generation 911 project. And it would help me if we could have more of an interactive discussion instead of me get up here and speechifying. I'm not too much on speechifying. So please, if you've got questions, don't hold them, just ask, and that may lead us off into something even more interesting. So I'd like to kind of know a little bit about y'all. How many of you are 911 people? All right. I know them. Okay, and how many of you work for telecommunications carriers? Are you all, that's two for the tape recording. Are you management people? Management, any engineers in here? Telecommunications engineers. How many people are students? Fantastic. I was really blown away to hear about this program that they have here at Murray State. It's very forward-thinking and unusual. Most of us who work in 911 kind of have to pick it up along the way, especially for somebody like me. I'm a lawyer, and it's really a huge honor to get to work in 911. I don't know too many lawyers who feel like at the end of the day that they've actually helped somebody in their darkest hour, and that is really the great gift that working in 911 is that you know that everything you're doing, as hard as you're working, it could save a life, and that's such an important thing. Because I am a lawyer, if you get too deep into the technical weeds, I'm going to have to get back with you. I'm not even going to pretend to get too technical. Since a lot of you are not 911 people, I'm going to kind of start off with what it is now, because what we're doing makes more sense if you kind of understand what 911 is now. And I can only really speak about my own personal experience in Tennessee. The 911 infrastructure in Tennessee, and probably in Kentucky too, I imagine, basically was set up some 30 years ago for landlines, before cell phones were even created. And geniuses kind of came up with a way to convert it to work for cell phones. But basically, it is a copper wire adjunct to your normal phone system. I mean, like all the stuff that you can do with your iPhone, which I should take out here so that I don't run over my time, is not copper wire. It's 911 is analog. 911 is like an express elevator in a high-rise. It takes you, when you dial 911, it's going to zip you straight to a 911 call center. So it's it's connected to your regular phone infrastructure, but it's also separate. Right now in Tennessee, and just about everywhere else I'm sure, it's analog, copper wire, 30 years old or older. All the things that you expect from this, it's really not capable of doing. And to make it even more complicated, it's not like it's just owned by one person. There are hunks of it that are owned by different carriers, and then if you want to get into the whole location information thing, that's a whole different group of people that own it. So when you have an outage, sometimes it is so frustrating, because you know that, time is of the essence. It's 911. But first of all, you got to pin down who's responsible for the outage, where the outage is, but then who's responsible. Then you get into the circular firing squad. It's not my technology. No, we didn't do this. And then kind of nailing that down, it takes time. So what we're doing in Tennessee is one throat to choke, and the state 911 board is going to be responsible for the whole system. We are building a digital 911 system. So first I'm going to talk just a little bit about governance, because being a lawyer, that is something I can speak confidently about. So my board, the Tennessee Emergency Communications Board, was created to assist the state's 100 emergency communications districts, which are the local districts that either facilitate or provide 911 service. And you're going to hear me say PSAP, PSAP, PSAP. That's a public safety answering point. That's where 911 kind of happens. That's where the dispatchers and call takers are. The other reason that my board was formed was to establish emergency communications for all citizens of the state. And that is a big deal for us because, especially in a mobile society, rather than just have islands of good 911, our General Assembly decided that there should be a uniform statewide system so that when you're traveling down I-40 across Tennessee, you should have the same level of 911 service no matter where you are. And there's that whole kind of equality thing. I mean, if you are a small rural county that doesn't have the revenue to build a big 911 center or even a technologically acceptable 911 center, does that mean that your 911 calls are less important than somebody that lives in Memphis? So I'm very proud that our General Assembly took that into consideration and gave the Tennessee Emergency Communications Board the directive to make a uniform statewide system. They did another really great thing. First of all, states that have 911 boards, in the research that I've done, are much farther along. Y'all have a 911 board, and I've met with them. They're great, and they're really forward-thinking and looking towards the 911 system here. States that don't have a 911 board, I mean, there are some states that don't have statewide 911 yet. Oh, and Missouri, they don't have a state board, and they're just kind of, they have little pockets of good 911 and then not. Several other states like that. But in Tennessee, by law, 5 of the 9 members have to work in 911. So what's happened with our board is that, you know, it's 911 for 911. They're not talking about, you know, competitive edges or anything like that. It's really, the majority of them are just trying to make sure that 911 works and they know how it works, so that helps a lot. So the board basically administers the deployment. As I said, there's 100 emergency communications districts across our state, and the board basically provides them with standards and funding, and we set technical standards. And one of the technical standards that we set, which, because I'm talking to y'all, it's hitting home here, and I want to rush ahead and not forget about it, which is the board tries not to do any kind of unfunded mandates, but one mandate that they have put in place is you have to have a backup generator at your PSAP, and you have to have a UPS system. The UPS is to make sure that a call that comes in, it doesn't get dropped while the generator's gearing up if you have a power outage. And this makes such a huge difference. A couple years ago, y'all had a terrible ice storm, and I know that some of our folks out in West Tennessee sent mobile PSAPs up here because some of the PSAPs didn't have backup generators and stuff, and they had kind of some issues with that. And I just kind of wanted to bring that to your attention, because even a second of an outage could kill somebody. I mean, and that's another thing that I just want to kind of bring, as we're doing NG 911, we've got all these IT people, and they have their own culture. Oh, you got to reboot. So what? Rebooting in 911 world is a major terrible thing. You don't want any kind of outages. So that's kind of a cultural difference that, especially I'm speaking to the students here in particular, if you get into 911, and I really hope some of you will, keep in mind that the kind of technical engineering thing that you're looking at, there's a different culture for 911, because outages aren't just something that you take for granted. Someone could die, basically. I'll probably mention that a couple different times as we get through this. So right now, that's what the board is doing. Aside from kind of doing the administrative stuff, we are starting a new project. Yes?
Since you mentioned no unfunded mandates.
Yeah.
Made me wonder, what's the funding model for 911 in Tennessee?
It is fantastic because that's my next slide. Great question. Okay, now let me say this. Our funding model is probably going to change because part of our funding model is based on landlines. The way our funding model works right now is that the local districts, which were created by the General Assembly in the 1980s, were funded solely by a 911 service charge on landlines. And the charge, the local districts can set it up to 65 cents for residential lines per line per month, and up to $2 for businesses. My board can take that higher if the district asks. It can be raised up to $1.50 for a residential line and $3 per business line, up to a maximum of 100 lines. But one thing that our locals have been just really struck by as the years go by is that the landlines are going away. They're being replaced by voice over IP. Voice over IP and any non-wireline telecommunications service is paid to the state board, to the Emergency Communications Board, at $1 per user or subscriber per month. And the board has sent lots of money back to the districts because we don't want to do unfunded mandates, and we also provide operational funding. But in March, Charter Telecommunications switched over from remitting as a landline provider to a non-wireline provider. And so a number of the districts are finding themselves in a big financial hole. I mean, if you're working at a district and all of a sudden you have over $200,000 hole in your predicted revenue, that can be pretty shocking. The board is trying to find a way to kind of make up for that, but we can't sustain that for, over a period of time. So I have a feeling that during the next legislative session there will probably be some changes. The forward-thinking way of dealing with the funding, I think, is to have a technology-neutral model, and that's what we're looking at, because who knows what the heck's going to come next, and certainly the landline, relying just on landlines as a separate thing, it's not really working. So, did that answer your question?
Well, I was just confused by part of the answer. If a carrier switched from one model to the other, did they pay more or less?
They would pay generally, it would depend on what type of service it was, but if it was, like if they were the fee is just a pass-through, right? So the district would be used to getting maybe $3 for every business line, and now they're getting part of the $1 fee that the state board is getting. So that's the difference. Instead of collecting it locally at a higher rate in most cases, it's being distributed out by the state, so they're getting less money. Okay. Just to kind of talk about kind of where we are, Tennessee was the third state to provide statewide enhanced 911 phase 2 service. What that means is with your cell phones, we had all of the technology in place so that, assuming that everything's working right and you are at a place where you can triangulate to a tower, we have the capability to get latitude and longitude, which is huge. That's like the whole basis of modern 911 is providing location technology. So, and we actually received an award for being the best state or regional program from the E911 Institute in Washington, D.C. So, talking a little bit about the Next Generation 911 project. We've been saving for this since 2006, and that's another governance thing that I think is important to point out. In our law, it says that the funds collected for 911 do not go into the state's general fund. They are separate. We can save up for projects because of that. And actually, there's a federal law that says funds collected for 911 shall not be used for anything else. So, and every year, the 911 folks have to do a report to the feds to explain the status of their 911 funds. So, in 2006, NENA, which is the National Emergency Number Association, it's the National Professional Association for 911, a standard-setting body, printed up this big pamphlet kind of setting off an alarm that said, the current 911 system was never intended to receive calls and data from new and emerging technologies. And as a result, the old copper wire technology that we're using now is being asked to do stuff that it was not designed to handle. And that is definitely the truth. And VoIP has been like a game changer. As I said, locating a person dialing 911 is the touchstone for a good progressive 911 system. With landlines, the folks in 911 pre-programmed your addresses into the system. So that's actually the most reliable, safest way to call 911 because they know your address. With cell phones, it's going to be within a certain radius that they're going to be able to find you. But honestly, it doesn't go up so that if you're on the 16th floor of a building, they're going to be kind of guessing. It's not an exact science. And there can be issues with not being able to stuff in the way so you can't triangulate. But with VoIP, this is how it works, and y'all really do need to know this. Basically, if you've got VoIP, you program into your computer your location. So computers are mobile. So, okay, yep, I've programmed in my computer my location, so my VoIP phone knows where that is. And we have actually had people that have moved from Franklin, Tennessee down to Texas, calling 911, and what comes up? Right, the old Franklin, Tennessee address. And then you see people scrambling in the PSAPs going, oh my gosh, and trying to figure out, get on the internet and figure out the admin lines for PSAPs in that basic area down in Texas. I mean, it's very traumatic, especially if someone's calling and they can't talk. They're so ill or something that they can't talk. So if you're going to do a VoIP phone, please keep in mind that you need to have the correct address input in there. Don't just leave that for chance. So one of the great things about the system that we're working on, I told you a little bit about the circular firing squad of trying to figure out what the heck's wrong with it. We're basically responsible for all of it, but we've set up a NOC, a Network Operations Center. It's kind of the one throat to choke thing, so that if anyone thinks that they've got a problem that deals with NG 911, they call the NOC. It's run by Telecommunications Systems, Inc., one of our vendors. And that will track all the outages, and we have a whole kind of research arm to make sure that this isn't a system-wide problem, and that's working pretty well. Another good thing about doing a statewide system is if we have something that breaks, God forbid, in Memphis, someone who's been working over on the other side of the state, it's still the same technology, so you're not having to have so much specialization as you would in the old system. Okay, just kind of some pre-deployment things going on.
I have a question over here, a Twitter question for you, and you answered this a little bit, but before you go on, since you've been touching on it, with the advent of VoIP and cell service, how do 911 services handle a cell tower outage similar to one that some of us experienced here?
Well, the tower is not something that the state has responsibility for. That's the telecommunications service. And that's really an FCC issue. I know that they had what they called a derecho, bad straight line winds last summer that took down a number of towers and central offices. And, you know, when it's out, it's out. And when the whole phone system's out, I don't know what you do. I mean, if it's just one carrier, that's one thing. You could, try to use every way that you can to contact 911, but that is just not something that, as a state, we would have any control over. So, but the FCC is working on that, and they're putting standards in place, backup generators being one thing, regularly testing the backup generators being another. So hopefully they'll get that in hand. So moving on to the pre-deployment preparation for NG 911 that we did a feasibility study. We had R.L. Kimball and Associates do a feasibility study, and basically what we took from that, of course this was back in 2006, we were trying to we asked them to try to put together the dark fiber that might be available so we wouldn't have to build out the fiber ourselves, and that was going to be a huge proposition. So that kind of gave us thought. We also took in hand to get some legislation passed so that the state board would be authorized to do an NG 911 project. There is a state IP network that does NCIC, which is the criminal background stuff for the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, and they do e-health, they do libraries, they do TBI stuff. That's Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. And so we decided that we would team up with them because they basically already had the network, but we were going to be a private network that it had to be just 911 because our standards were much stricter. The necessity for having redundancy and no outages was such that we basically had to have our own separate infrastructure, which they were happy to put in for us. So we've teamed up with another state agency to provide the next generation 911 backbone. And that agency, NetTN, they contracted with AT&T, so it's an AT&T system that we're using. And I just want to say that the AT&T team that we've been working with has just been absolutely outstanding. I think they really understand that this is so important. And one of the reasons it's so important is because the vision of NENA and the whole and the point of doing this is that it's going to be a national system, in a sense, a system of systems, especially with Tennessee, and y'all have it too. We have so many neighbors. We have 9 neighbors, and crimes don't stop at the border between Tennessee and Kentucky, and it will be so helpful that we can have a completely integrated system. And that's the vision going forward. And that's part of the reason why I'm here, actually, is because we want our neighbors to know about this, and if we can help, there's no point in reinventing the wheel. If we can help in any way we want to, we've set some standards and have some information and stuff that we're more than happy to share, because everyone's going to have to be doing this eventually. So, but right now, there are just a few states that were out in front, and we've been very lucky because we could actually save up for it. And as I said, we've been saving up since 2006 for it. Indiana is another state that's moving ahead with the next generation 911. So what's the point of doing this? Stop the circular firing squad, for one thing. Improved reliability and redundancy, the ability to kind of have uniform technology so it's easier to repair. Another thing, I don't know about y'all, but there's always talk about, oh my goodness, we're going to have another big earthquake and Memphis is going to fall off the edge of the earth. And that's one of the things that this will help. Right now, transferring 911 calls, it can be challenging just to transfer one. With NG 911, you could transfer a whole PSAP full. You could just, if the PSAP fell off the edge of the earth, you can set up ahead of time where you want your calls to be transferred to. And that's a very big deal. And you can set up ahead of time, in this situation, I want them transferred over here. In this situation, I want them transferred over here. Or a place like Memphis, where, you know, it's the most populous area in our state. You could have, I want half of them over here and half of them over here to my neighbor to the north, or something like that. This system, because it's digital, is going to make text to 911 possible for us. I know that there's talk about ways to do text to 911 that perhaps you don't need a digital network, and I think that's great, but having a digital network makes everything that you do with this possible. So that's one of the things that we're looking towards. We'll be able to transfer photos. At some point, it's not developed yet, but can you imagine if you're witnessing a bank robbery or something, and you take the video with your phone, and you get you know, a picture of the perpetrator and their license plate, and then you just 911, choo. That's what we're heading for. This is also, we're going to do an instant messaging thing between PSAPs, so that they can kind of, oh my goodness, there's a chemical cloud coming your way kind of thing, that they can talk to each other better too, as part of the IP platform. And I'm going to leave the harassing non-initialized phones for later, just in case we run out of things to say, which I can't imagine would happen. So this is the technical stuff. It's a private, secure MPLS network. It's managed by our Office of Information Resources. What we have basically is two fully redundant central offices that are the routing centers, Nashville and Knoxville. If one goes down, the other can just completely handle everything. So it's fully redundant. And we have 4 network aggregation points, which would be Memphis, Nashville, Chattanooga, and Knoxville. And that's where the carriers enter into the network. We require carriers to enter into the network in at least 2 locations for redundancy, but a lot of them really are still wanting to direct connect to the PSAP, so we accommodate that. That's fine if that's what they want to do. We are setting this up to use the NENA I3 standards, which I would encourage everybody to follow, because that's how we will end up with a uniform nationwide system of systems. So our deployment plan, we've set up the core infrastructure, the aggregation centers and the 2 central offices, and one of the things that we're doing is a statewide GIS mapping system. When we're fully deployed, part of the I3 standard is that you will route your calls using a statewide map. Now, all the PSAPs in Tennessee have GIS mapping systems, but they're not integrated together. And I don't know about y'all, but we don't have official county lines. So what we had to do was require all of our 911 people to sit down with their neighbors. We did not supply the pizza, but I hear a lot of pizza was supplied. And they had to decide where the boundaries actually were going to be on the map. Because you don't want gaps, because no one would be there to respond to an emergency at that gap. You don't want overlaps between counties, because then you're going to have responders from 2 counties and you're wasting resources. So it was really important for everyone to agree on where the boundaries were. Because we don't have official boundaries, they can change. So what we've done is set up a website kind of thing, so that a district can propose a change, the website will notify the neighbor that's impacted by it what the change is, and they have to, they kind of are required to agree on it. It won't be put into the statewide map until there's consent on both sides. But that could be really important. Getting rid of gaps and overlaps in your GIS maps is a huge proposition and very important, and we're about done with that. So at this point what we're doing is we're connecting all the PSAPs and all the wireless, the cell phone carriers, to the infrastructure. And what we're going to do, we're just deploying wireless. We're leaving the wireline legacy network in place, so that just adds an extra layer of redundancy. As we're trying to put this together and move it forward, if there was an outage, you've still got the legacy as a backup. At some point, there will be a choice whether to continue with the legacy network or not. And so after we do the wireless, then we'll do VoIP, and then we'll do wireline. And we're also doing an ALI database, an automatic location information database the state will administer. Right now it's done by private industries, and they charge PSAPs to dip into that database, and since the PSAPs are providing them with the GIS mapping information, they resent that, basically. So, just a quick status report. The core was done in January 2012. Almost all of our carriers, except for AT&T and Verizon, are through with connecting to the infrastructure, and our NOC is opening, is working 24/7 right now. Okay. We've got almost all of our PSAPs connected, or at least at some stage of connectivity. And this is important considering what we just heard about security. This system is not connected to the internet, and we've required every PSAP to sign a user agreement saying that you can't have connections to anything but the NG 911 network. We're hoping that that will keep us secure. Okay. These are the players in our project, the state board and the state agency that runs the network. AT&T is their vendor. TCS runs our NOC and is basically the 911 management part. And that's something that I think was really a good thing, and maybe something y'all should think about when you do it, which is we didn't want to put all our eggs in any one vendor's basket. So AT&T and TCS have kind of had to learn to work together, and they kind of watch each other, and they've been extremely professional, and we've been very happy with that system because that way we've got two fresh sets of eyes on it. We also have technical consultants, mission critical partners, and the state's GIS service. Does anyone have any questions about that?
I know I have some questions, but I'm going to let others first.
Lynn, one of your earlier slides, it showed, I think, 87% of the funding that comes to you goes back out. Mm-hmm. So your 13% is for your operations, including the network. Is that accurate?
No. We've been, the money that we took in last year, we sent 87% out, and we dipped into our reserves to help pay for some of the NG 911 stuff. And a lot of the NG 911 stuff, we put aside $25 million for the local districts to buy i3 controllers to use to hook into the network. But we think that we're estimating that the recurring cost for this network will probably be around $16 to $18 million a year. Right now, we're not really having recurring costs. We're still doing build-out.
Other questions? I'm going to ask one if you all don't raise your hand. You just don't want to hear your answer.
Just generally, what's the business case for text to 911? And it seems to me that promoting it kind of runs counter to what we're trying to tell people, which is don't text while you're in an automobile.
That is such a good point, and it's a complicated kind of thing. The message I think that we want to get out is text if you can't call. But text to 911, the way I'm looking at it, is for deaf people. That's the primary thing. That's how they communicate with each other. And I mean, think about the challenges that deaf people and hard of hearing people have calling 911 and communicating. We've done quite a bit of work with the deaf community in Tennessee, and they really want this. And to me, that's the selling point. There's also the person that's, stuck in the closet with burglars downstairs and they don't want to be heard talking. So there's that too, but you're nailing it. You're exactly right. If you can call, you should call, because it's so much quicker, and the call takers can get the information that they need so much more efficiently. On the other hand, it's just terribly important to get this in place for the deaf community.
Well, the question that I had to do with the GIS services, and that as I think about the GIS, it intrigues me the possibilities that are there, and some of the stuff that you're initially roll out, I'd like to hear more about. But I'm also thinking that I may be in a county maybe near the border of another county, and the response time is actually quicker to go from a different county than the county that I'm in. Will the GIS ultimately be able to help those responders to make those decisions?
I can't speak for Kentucky, but in Tennessee, that is going to be a decision of local government, whether they have agreements and we do in some cases. I mean, we've got a bunch of lakes and stuff where if you've got an emergency right here, and the people in this county where the emergency is would have to go all the way around the lake to get there. They'll have agreements, but that's going to be a local governance thing. But the mapping could assist in those kind of decisions. I totally agree with you on that, because you'll be able to really, you will have, maps are now available not just of your own county, but all the surrounding counties, so that you can kind of, see what's going on.
What information is being, right now, or as it's rolled out, what's the GIS information other than, the house or the location coming up on the map? Is there any other metadata on the location that you're receiving?
That's kind of a local decision, layers and layers. You can have layers of all the fire hydrants and defibrillators, and you can put as much as you want on that, and we encourage that. Also, my board has made the GIS mapping system available to all other state agencies and federal agencies for free, so that, it's like build it once, use it 100 times, so that, the tax assessors or other entities, the TBI with, you're not supposed to have offenders within so many feet of schools and all that kind of stuff, that we make the maps available so that they have a truly accurate, up-to-date map that they can work from. Sir, Forrest.
Lynn, of the 100 PSAPs, is that accurate?
No, it's 100 districts, which are independent statutory municipalities, and some have more than one PSAP. There's probably about 142 PSAPs in Tennessee.
How many are fully implemented with the new network for both, both landline and wireless at this point?
No, we're not doing any kind of landline.
And my last question, do you have a milestone when it'll be done on the stages each year?
Well, what I tell our team, because we're kind of, as I say, we're going where no man has gone before in some of these respects, because we don't have a book that we can just open up and follow. We're kind of making some of this up as we go along. I tell them it's very much more important with 911 to be right rather than right now. And so we're not governing the deployment by time schedules, but we envision that it will be done in 2015.
In Indiana, speaking to the point that you were just making, one of the decisions that was made about 3 or 4 years ago was the necessity, as we move forward in this, to consolidate the number of PSAPs. And a very courageous Senator Hirschman, undertook to take the political fire that inevitably ensues when you have that sort of situation. One county in Indiana alone had over a dozen PSAPs.
Wow.
Well, this is a very fragmented county, a county where there are a lot of adjacent jurisdictions, and so there are huge political jurisdictional battles. But one of the things that I would suggest is that as a part of the process for those who are still in the process of thinking about moving in that direction, that you also bite the bullet and try to do as much as you can with regard to consolidation of the PSAPs, because as you were talking about earlier, in situations, for example, where a PSAP goes down, it becomes much more difficult, geometrically more difficult to manage that sort of situation if you've got a proliferation of PSAPs.
That is so true, and you just make such a great point. If you're going to consolidate, do it before you start your NG911 deployment, because once they've purchased an i3 controller and are ready to work on your system, the savings that you would have had by consolidating are gone. The other thing that I would just suggest with NG911 deployment, for political reasons, political meaning that we wanted all the local 911 people to be excited about the project, and they have very strong opinions about the type of equipment in their PSAP, we have allowed them to purchase whatever type of controller, which is the equipment that connects the network to, it makes the 911 basically in a PSAP. And so we have all sorts of different controller vendors operating, and that's been a big challenge because they're all very different, and the uniformity that if you just had one vendor would make things a lot easier. We're doing it, and it's going to be fine, but if I was the king of the world, there would just be one controller, and that's a basic one type of controller. That's how they've done it in this group of 40 PSAPs in Texas. They just had 4. Another thing to consider is that you can have like a controller embedded in your infrastructure, which we will have that as an offering in the later stages of deployment, just as something if people want to do it. But that saves maintenance, it gives you that uniformity, and the local folks never have to worry about an outage or trying to have things become antiquated or anything like that. So.
All right, well, with that, I will say thank you. And that will conclude our time for this session. If you have any other questions for Lynn, feel free to come up and catch her.